What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Johnny Mack here. Just wanted to give you a heads up that if you are looking for a community that is open to discussion as far as mentorship, conservation, the wild, becoming a better person, and all of that, there is a group for you on Facebook, and it is called Soul Seekers. Soul Seekers, we are all about making ourselves a better person. We're all about making sure hunting lasts for generations to come and encouraging people to get plugged in. Whether you are someone who has something to give or someone who needs to soak it up like a sponge, this is a community for you, and I strongly encourage you that if you're on Facebook to join Soul Seekers, and if you're not on Facebook, hop on there just for that group. It is only going to be as powerful as we all make it. And so just remember that life happens for you, it doesn't happen to you, and that you can't outgive good. You can't outgive good, people. I want you to understand that, and I want you to believe it, because when we believe that and we lead with courage and we lead with intention, lives are changed, lives are transformed, just like on this podcast, transformation through primal adventure. Be blessed. Enjoy this episode. Talk soon. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack. Through this podcast, I'm on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship as conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters, both new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The Soulful Hunter Podcast is also proudly presented by the Crazy Elk Company. Based out of the state of Washington with products made in America, they are providing solutions with gear to problems you didn't even know you had. Their tag wallet is one of those solutions, and I had the pleasure of using it on all of my hunts this last year, and it is now a mainstay in my kill kit. The tag wallet is a water-resistant zippered pouch that comes with its own reusable zip ties to safely and securely store your notch tag for quick and easy access. For more information, go to crazyelkcompany.com and use the code SOULFUL with a capital S to save 20% at checkout. Be blessed, everyone, and as always, stay soulful. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack, and I am joined by the archery wizard himself, Joel Turner from Shot IQ, and we are diving into all things archery and really zenning out on this episode. If Joel and I go silent, you know it's because we're going deep inside our minds, and we'll return back for this episode at some point. But Joel, thank you so much for coming on an episode and talking archery with me.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I absolutely love podcasting because it allows me to have a lot of conversations with people that I wouldn't necessarily interact with on like a daily basis, but it gives a good excuse for me to sit down and have a glass of whiskey and be like, all right, let's chat a little bit if you don't mind.
Nice. Yeah, that's cool.
I love it. So, a little history that I would love to know about you, because I haven't necessarily dug into your history of how you even started Shot IQ. But what were you raised
Uh,
an archer? Were you raised always shooting a bow, or when did you grab a bow and be like, this is it? This is the primal tool that I want to use.
I wouldn't say that I was raised with. I mean, I wasn't like pushed into it, but at 7, there was always my dad always had a recurve bow in the corner of our garage, and he never shot it. I never saw him shoot it. And at the age of 7 years old, I finally asked my old man to string it up for me, and he strung it up for me. And I couldn't even hardly pull it. I mean, I was 7 years old. It was a 41-pound bear cub recurve,
Mm.
and he had a bunch of yellow painted wood arrows with real turkey feathers on them. Some of them had points, some of them didn't have points. It didn't matter to me. I mean, I can remember those arrows to this day. They had green knocks on them, and yeah, the string was kind of a dirty white Dacron, brown serving, and he had a little thing of uh, gray electrical tape wrapped around it for a knock point. I
Mm.
can remember everything about that bow. In fact, he still has that bow to this day. But I would shoot that thing until my fingers bled
You
every single day,
wow.
starting at 7 years old.
Shooting at stumps
And
or
by
trees, or what were you shooting
just
at 7 years old?
anything, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. I just shot it at stuff, pine cones or dirt clods or whatever I could find to shoot at. So, needless to say, I went through arrows pretty quickly. And then my mom bought me a little fiberglass recurve the next year because she saw my interest in archery. That thing had just like a piece of balin twine for a string. I bought it at the hardware store in Eatonville. And I had orange painted wood arrows with blue fake feathers on that thing. And I would shoot that till my fingers bled. In fact, I wore the shelf off the thing. Just shooting. I was I was completely addicted to watching my arrows fly. I mean, I used to shoot them up in the not like straight up in the air, but I'd shoot see how far they would go, and oh gosh, it was fun. But you know, I'm super interested in archery as a youngster. None of my brothers shot bows. My dad didn't shoot a bow, but I would just shoot. And we all got BB guns when we were 9. When we turned 9 on our ninth birthday. We all got BB guns. Well, I've got 2 older brothers. So when my oldest brother, that's 3 years older than me, he got his BB gun at 9. I was 6, and he never shot it. And I wore it out. I broke it. I shot it so much I broke it. And then my other brother got his, and I shot his so much I broke it. So then my dad bought when I turned 9, my dad bought me an 880 Daisy 880 power line, which was much better. So I shot that till I broke that, and it was just I mean, I would shoot all day, every day. That's all I would do.
You are the only other person I have ever talked with that has talked about blowing up BB guns from shooting them too much. I also have had that experience. I didn't get into archery until 5 years ago, but when it came to shooting, I had a BB gun in my hand from the youngest of ages, and I was always lining up GI Joes and little green army men in my backyard and pretending I was on like this
Yeah,
Wild West experience. And even if it was raining, I'd
sure.
go out without my rain gear because it's like I gotta be tough and I gotta be, gritty and all this stuff. And I'd pretend I was
Yeah.
on some wild adventure with my BB gun, and I'd shoot the barrels, like the inner part of the barrels would actually explode out of my BB guns. And I remember duct
Yeah,
taping them as
the
best I could.
the mechanisms would always break. I just shoot them so much, but I was starting to notice by the time, let's see, but probably by the time I was 10, my mom bought me a Browning Fox 2, which was my first compound bow. And I would notice that I couldn't aim it. I would lock below the target. And at 10 years old, it didn't really mean much to me, but I would try to line things up, and then I would just like jump to the target and let it go with my fingers. And that was the start of target panic for me. I mean, I'm sure it started after the first arrow that I ever shot.
Mm.
But that's when I started to notice things. Even at that young of an age, it was ridiculous. And I remember shooting my first tournament when I was 12 years old, and I was always locked off the target, and but my buddy was so much worse than me. I mean, he's shooting a compound with sights and fingers, and he couldn't even get it to full draw, and he'd let it go. I'm like, well, why do you got sights on there? You can't put them on the target, right? So it was a friggin' nightmare, and we went through our whole high school and early adulthood and all that stuff. I mean, I would go to his house before school, and he had a giant log pile next to the target. So we would both have to draw back and aim at the log pile so we didn't let our arrows go. And then we'd both try to swing our bow over and shoot the target. It was a nightmare.
Mm.
I mean, it was target panic to the nth degree. And then, let's see, I went through, but I was always good with a shotgun, right? It didn't, shotgunning was money because it was always moving targets and flying birds and all that stuff. And I had, I guess, pretty good hand-eye coordination because I was good with a shotgun. But you put any type of precision weapon system in my hand, and I was worthless, bro.
Mm. Yeah.
And so I right out of college, I got a job with the USDA Wildlife Services, and I was doing lots of suppressed air rifle work up your way, and shooting all day long, shooting starlings and pigeons and all kinds of stuff. And air rifles, money. 22 long rifle, money. You give me any type of center fire that had any recoil, worthless. Right? Like if I had a coyote contract, we're shooting urban coyotes with suppressed 243s and such, and you get like one chance, right? Well, as soon as the crosshairs would get on hair, man, I'd be yanking the crap out of that trigger, and I'd miss. So I would avoid the coyote contracts because I didn't have the confidence to make that shot. And then I became a cop. And in the academy, I was able to mechanically fix the problem of shot control because in the academy, I bought myself a 1911 pistol where you've got a much shorter trigger stroke because I couldn't hit anything with the Glock. It would always shoot low and left. Like, what's the matter with this thing? This thing shoots low and left. Pick up another one. Geez, this one shoots low and left too. Right.
Uh-huh.
But 1911 had the shorter trigger stroke in it. So the low and left wasn't as bad. Little did I know that I was just anticipating the recoil and yanking the crap out of the trigger, not knowing any of the science of what I was doing. But I for some reason, my determination rose in the academy, right? Because it probably kind of scared the crap out of me that I was about to enter the world of law enforcement, and I wasn't that good of a shot. And so during the academy, I kind of upped my determination and buckled down a bit, and I took first in firearms in the academy, and that's kind of where my instruction stuff really was born. And then 2 years into the job as a cop, I got on the SWAT team as a sniper because now I'm to the point. But get this, now I'm to the point where on targets, I'm money. I'm your man, right? I'm your guy when it comes to shooting targets. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking coyotes. Right? I'm thinking, what is this going to be like in a tactical situation where I'm supposed to shoot a hostage taker or something like that, and I don't know how it's going to go, and that scared the crap out of me, right?
Yeah.
So here I am, brand new guy on the SWAT team, and we're doing numerous call outs a month, and I'm like, oh man, I don't know how this is gonna go. And that was horrible. It's a horrible feeling, and it should scare the crap out of people that most cops are in that realm today. Most cops don't have a plan for a precision environment. And luckily for most cops, it's not a precision environment that they're in. It's kind of a gunfight type deal where you're dealing with more your hand-eye coordination and stuff. But it's so 2 years into it, I become a SWAT sniper, and I also became a firearms instructor. And that's where things started to turn around for me because I started to get into instruction and figure out that in firearms instruction there was a cancer of the instructor yelling at the students, front sight, front sight, front sight. And I'm thinking, I don't think the front sight's the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that they're shooting low and left because of an aiming problem. I believe it's because they're yanking the trigger and that motion is carrying the round off the target, low and left for a right-handed shooter. And I said, well, why don't we put the conscious mind where it's supposed to be in the trigger press instead of in the front sight? So I wrote this whole guide that is called The Mental Mechanics of Shooting, an Instructor's Guide. And I wrote the whole thing about how we've been concentrating on the wrong thing and how to actually concentrate. Now, I was just dealing with experience at this point. And usually it was negative experience because I wasn't that, I mean, I was a good shot on paper, but still did not have total control of my shot in high stress shooting events. But I started to figure out how to concentrate, right? And I would listen to people, and I would watch people in stressful situations. And what do people in stressful situations do? They always come up with some type of speech pattern, especially if they're trying to concentrate on a movement, right? So, and this speech pattern would always be repeated like a mantra.
Mm.
right? You watch people in stressful situations, they're like, "Oh, come on, come on, come on, come on," right? Whatever they would say would be repeated and it would be smooth, especially if it was guiding a movement. So that was a little aha moment for me. And then one day I had this student in the range, and this is what we call a nervous Nelly, right? So this kid he was a nervous cat. I mean, so he was shooting 20 yards and he was skipping rounds off the floor at 15. So his shot anticipation movements were huge. I mean, he's like closing his eyes, clutching the gun, yanking the trigger all at the same time. Nightmare, right? So, you still with me?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I'm I'm right
Okay.
there with you.
So this is the light bulb moment, bro. So I got on the driver's side of his gun so I could see the tip of his finger. I said, "Okay, I want you to start pressing the trigger, but don't make it go off. Just press it till it gets tight." And he was shooting a Glock, so it's got a pressure wall on the trigger. So he says, "Okay, yes, sir." So he moves the trigger till it gets tight on the pressure wall. I said, "Okay, I want you to start pressing the trigger, but don't make the gun go off." He's like, "Okay, yes, sir." So I see his finger move just the slightest bit. And then I took control of it, right? I'm like, "Okay, there you go. Keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing." And I'm watching his finger move, and it's moving exactly how I'm saying it. And I'm watching this all happen. And then all of a sudden, the round goes off, and he shoots it right through the middle,
Hmm.
right? And he says, "Oh, sir, that scared me a bit." I'm like, "Yeah, that's what it's supposed to do." But that was my aha moment. I went, "Holy smokes, I had complete control of this kid's mind. I controlled a movement through speech, especially a movement that caused an explosion." And
Mm.
that's the problem in shooting, is that your mind, your subconscious mind, will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise. If it can time the explosion, it will time the explosion.
Say
So
that it's
that was
Joel,
the
say
light.
say that one more time because I feel like you're hitting it really good right there, but it's almost like I'm taking this in as you're speaking and I'm thinking
Yes.
about me applying my shots. But will you just say that
Right,
one more time so that listeners actually really gather that?
right. So the core problem in shooting, and if your instruction doesn't take in this core problem, then you're just dealing with the physicality of shooting and not the mentality of shooting. So once again, your subconscious mind will not allow you to cause your body impact as a surprise. If it's doing a movement that's going to cause an explosion, it will always time the movement. It'll time the explosion. It will time the flinch. So basically, what it does is it links other bracing motor programs to the trigger motor program. So when you press the trigger, there's all kinds of other muscle contractions that come along with that trigger press. And we call it the flinch in firearms, right?
Mm.
In archery, it's called target panic, right? Or whatever you want to call it. It's our mind not allowing us to cause an explosion as a surprise. But that's always been the goal, right? That's always been the goal, the surprise shot. I'm sure your grandpa told you should never know when the gun's going to go off. Just squeeze the trigger until it goes off, right? Well, that's much easier said than done.
Yeah, well,
So,
and especially if you don't even have a father or a grandfather teach you gun safety. That was something that I got to experience all on my own, learning this
yeah,
process. Which so it's really
right. So
cool
if
hearing you
you have
talk about this.
yeah, when you leave it to your own mind and your own way of learning things, because when we learn things, we start off in the cognitive stage of learning, and we're talking ourselves through the movement, and the movement has steps to it, right?
Yep.
And our goal is to practice that movement so that we become automatic, like in your case, throwing a football, right? The first time you threw a football was probably really choppy because you were thinking about all kinds of steps,
Yep.
but that quickly became automatic, right? Because you practiced it through life experience.
Yeah.
But in shooting, you can't follow the same learning pattern. In precision shooting, you have to stay cognitive.
Huh.
And that's all what I teach in Shot IQ. I teach the conscious defiance of human nature.
Interesting. Okay, let me
Because
ask.
it's natural.
Oh,
But
sorry, Joel. You bring up the sports analogy, and I always like to draw from prior knowledge and prior experiences.
mhm,
I was also a
yep,
basketball player for a long time, and I was a better
yep,
rhythm shooter than I was
mhm,
a spot shooter.
yep.
Does rhythm shooting play a role with shooting firearms in archery, or is that kind of am I off base with with what I'm talking about right there?
So there's really no analogies that can be used between other sports and shooting, and here's why. If you shoot a basketball, the basketball doesn't explode when you shoot it properly,
Right.
right? If you had knowledge that the basketball was going to explode 6 inches in front of your hand, when you shot it properly, the movement of you shooting, all those motor programs would become an anticipated movement because they're going to cause an explosion, right? So they'd be all jacked up and you'd never do it right.
Hmm.
So that's and when you're dealing with other sports, like when you shoot a basketball, that's what's called an open loop control system. So there's two control systems in your mind that govern all of your movements. The one that your mind prefers is the open loop, where the brain sends a motor program to the effector. Right, the effector is the muscle group that catches the motor program. So when you shoot a basketball, it's very fluid, right? You don't have to think a bunch about the movement. You've practiced it. You have it. It is its own motor program, right? And you shoot a basketball, your movement is too fast for you to gain feedback within it, right?
Hmm. Yep.
Same thing when you throw a football, right? But then there's the game winner, right? And so you have the game winning. Let's say that for your free throw, you bounce the ball 3 times, then you catch it, you shake your ass, and then you shoot. You shoot the ball, and that's your routine every single time,
Right.
right? And as long as you stay in that process, you're probably 8 times out of 10, you're probably going to hit the basket.
Yeah.
But on the game winner, you change your thought process. On the game winner, like, okay, I got to break my wrist perfectly, hold it like that, or whatever you may do. You add a conscious thought into a movement that should be open loop, and therefore you change the totality of the movement and you miss almost every time.
Ah.
That's why, like clay pigeon shooters will shoot 99 out of 100 so many times, but to get that 100th bird, they just have to not change their thought process. But
Interesting.
in precision shooting, we are trying to move a trigger in what's called a closed loop control system. Closed loop just simply is it's slow enough you could stop it anywhere within it. It's
Yeah.
slow enough you can gain feedback within it, right? So like on that elk that you shot, I watched the video there. There's no way that you shot that without punching the trigger, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know.
it happens. It happens. If you don't know, then I guarantee you punch the trigger, right? And you got the elk, congratulations on that. But if you don't know, then you can't blueprint how you did it,
Well, I
right?
can.
So what I'm
Okay. Do you
but
want to dive into this a little bit right now, or you want to keep chatting about the shot?
well, just one thing, if you go closed loop on your trigger work, meaning you have 100% concentration in how you're moving the trigger, you will remember everything about it. And then and only then can you blueprint it. So you know what you're thinking, you know what you're saying, you know you could stop it, and you know what decisions you made to get yourself there.
Mm.
So when you shoot that perfect controlled shot, now you have the tools, the questions that you need to answer to blueprint it. And then you just make the next shot, same blueprint, make the blueprint stronger and stronger and stronger with every shot.
Interesting. Okay, so talking
Yeah.
to referring to the shot is the elk episode on Soul Seekers on Carbon TV. And just to
Mhm.
back you up, so you're saying, do you remember if you punched the trigger? Do you remember your shot? I can actually take you
Mhm.
through every process of that. And
Yeah.
I remember so behind the bush, I had to draw before I saw the elk. I knew that the
Yep.
elk was going to be at a certain distance once I stepped out
Mhm.
beyond the bush. And
Mhm.
my focus, and it's interesting that you talk about verbal mantras because I'm an ultra marathon runner, and you have to have that mantra to like just speak to yourself to keep going. I'm a huge proponent of self talk. And so when I stepped out, first off I had to
Mhm.
find the elk, and then
Mhm.
I was in athletic position, and I settled in, and I remember my self talk is back elbow up,
Okay.
back elbow up, find the pin, find the elk, and from what I remember, and then this is where I say I don't know if I punched the trigger, but I actually felt like I had a great follow through, and that is where I don't know whether I'm right or wrong in the eyes of Joel Turner, but
Mhm.
I felt smooth. I felt under
Mhm.
control, and I didn't feel rushed.
Do you remember? Because I'm watching it right now. Do you remember saying to yourself, "Back elbow up"?
Yes.
And when in your shot do you say that?
As I am taking my horizontal steps, as I'm side shuffling,
Yeah.
and right
Yep.
before I kind of settle into my actual shooting stance.
Okay. So I'm watching it, and it's a well executed shot. You did go open loop on the trigger, right? But because this is very important, because you remembered to say back elbow up, and that means something very specific to you,
Yep.
right? Because I've interviewed so many successful bow hunters, successful snipers, successful gun hunters, and I ask them a very specific question. I ask them one question: what do you say to yourself during your shot? And every one of them has an answer.
Mm.
Every single hundreds of people that I've interviewed, and I've asked that specific question. What do you say to yourself? Every one of them usually says something different, but they all say something,
Wow.
right?
That is
And what that
really
does,
interesting.
that is a conscious decision to override the subconscious, because the subconscious just wants you to be efficient. It doesn't need you to be accurate. It just wants you to be efficient, because the only thing the subconscious is trying to do is protect you from the explosion of the bow going off.
Mm.
And people will say, well, it's not that big of an explosion, right? If I could take a bow and when you drew it back with an arrow in it, you didn't know whether it was going off or not, because those pre-ignition movements always get masked by the bow going off, do they not? But in a rifle system, if you keep the safety on unknowingly, you get to see all of it, right?
Right.
You get to see all those pre-ignition movements, all that whole huge body jerk that happens, right?
Interesting.
So when you say something during your shot process, speech is the route to concentration, right? So when you talk, that changes your thought process to a more conscious thought process.
Okay,
So go ahead.
I just gotta jump in here because if you actually go back, I sent you the archery elk episode, but on the very
Mhm,
first episode of season one, I shoot a bear at 377 yards. And
mhm,
my consciousness, when I got behind my rifle and I got the bear
mhm,
in my crosshairs, I said
mhm,
dead bear to myself. Dead bear.
mhm,
And
mhm,
it's funny is like I guess this is not talked about within the hunting realm very often. It's like people
mhm.
don't acknowledge their self-talk, or is that just something that truly rises you above in levels of proficiency, is the ability to self-talk, or is that something that, because obviously it doesn't come natural if people are having that big of a difficult time with it. What do you think?
It's completely unnatural for the human mind to control a movement that causes an explosion.
Hmm.
The only way you can do that is by making a decision, right? Like, think about this. And I always use this analogy in my clinics. There you are, standing with your little toesies hanging over the edge of the cliff. right?
Mm-hmm.
And you got to jump off this cliff. It's a 30-foot drop. And you're looking in that water and you're like, huh, I don't know if that water's deep enough, right?
Yep.
At that specific moment, you will never jump because your mind is in the future, right? It's in the results.
Yep.
So you can say dead bear, but dead bear's got to mean something to you. It's got to mean to make that bear dead, I've got to press the trigger perfectly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there you are, you got your little toesies hanging over the edge. It's not until you bring yourself back and become conscious and make a decision like, here I go. What do you always hear people say before they jump off a cliff or out of an airplane? Here I go. Very very common verbiage. So I have people say that at a very specific moment in their shot, because what happens when you make a decision, a conscious decision, is it increases your presence.
Right.
It brings you in, right? It increases your presence. So if I need somebody to be present enough so that they can concentrate on a movement that causes an explosion, like the trigger work that you do, be that on your bow or your gun, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have them mount the weapon system. Like, let's say we're shooting a bow. So they draw back and aim, get it done, and watch it to keep it. Because based on visual proprioception, you don't have control over your aim, anyways. It's always going back to the middle. Just watch it like a picture, right? So you draw back and aim, get it done, watch it to keep it. And then once your aim is complete, then you address the trigger. Then you put your finger on the trigger, but you don't shoot yet, because you putting your finger on the trigger can never actually trigger the shot. It needs to trigger a decision, right?
Right.
So so once they've got their aim, they've got their finger on the trigger, then and only then do they say, here I go. That increases their presence enough so that now they can concentrate on the trigger press. And to do that, they use the mantra for firearms. I have people say, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, right? It's very smooth, it's rhythmic, it's unending, because you will move how you speak.
Mm.
Okay. So
Does
that's all the science and stuff behind that. But this the fact that you say something during your shot, that's the big pattern of success.
Interesting. Okay, so this is I've talked with my hunting partners about this, and
Mhm.
they always, when I've shared what the things that I do, because my buddy I call him Two Shot Tony. I can't wait for him to
Mhm.
hear this podcast.
Yeah.
um,
Right.
and we all, he's always like, "Man, you're just so confident on your shots." And it's
Yeah.
like I'm also a believer in manifestation and speaking things into existence, but I think
Yeah.
that probably goes right along the line of you actually have to speak it into
Mhm.
existence. So when you're talking about focusing on squeeze, 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 you're not even thinking about your target at that point, are you?
No.
you
No,
you
you're not,
you're
because you don't
y-
it does nothing for you to put any amount of concentration or conscious mind into the aim. It doesn't help you at all. You've already set the aim, and by watching it, whether you're looking through a magnified optic or your bow sight or you're shooting bare bow or whatever, you're creating a sight picture, and then you have to be able to let it go and just step back from it and watch it and monitor it, but understand that you don't have any control over it. And then you make that decision to concentrate. And that's when you talk yourself through it. Keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing. And when you have those thoughts come in, like, oh my God, that's the biggest bull I've ever seen in my life, right?
yep.
You have to talk louder than the stress that's coming in.
Yes.
That's how you consciously override. You're basically doing a conscious override of your central nervous system.
Okay, so I can speak directly to that. So the very first
Mhm.
time I went archery hunting, it was down in Western Washington, and my buddy and we drew straws for who was the first shooter on day one and who got
Mhm.
first shot on day two. I was first shooter on day two, and about a half hour into our morning hike and hunt, we jumped some cows working uphill. Didn't see any
Mhm.
bulls, but it's September, there's a bull hanging around. And this is the
Mhm.
very first time I've ever experienced the elk woods, mind you. So like this was only looking at the year on my Pope and Young. This is only 4 years ago. My very first
Mhm.
time archery hunting. And all of a sudden I hear a bugle for the very first time and my
Mhm.
heart is just boom, 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 and
Yeah.
it's running, and I see this tree just shaking, and
Mhm.
I know that this elk's going to be coming downhill, and we got my buddy and I have this elk in like a triangle position, and he even had the first shot, but he was a good friend and he stayed true to his word of me being the first
Yeah.
shooter. He ended up shooting a once in a lifetime bull in North Dakota, so that he got
Nice.
his for staying true to his word. But so
Mhm.
here I was, and as soon as I saw the tips of the antlers, it was uphill for me, so like rise, come over this knoll. I had to draw
Mhm.
because I knew the eyes were going to be on me the entire time. And it stopped
Mhm.
and it put its head right over and just looked, and I had a pin just on its forehead. And I wasn't really shaking at that point other than the fact that I was more, like, nervous, but as soon as it let
Mhm.
out a bugle and ripped and started working its
Mhm.
way downhill closer to me, I
Mhm.
was all over the place with my bow hand.
Mhm.
I mean, I must have been going 2 feet back and forth, up and down, all over. However, going back to speaking about your shot, I knew
Mhm.
it because it felt like an eternity. I was like, "This thing's
Mhm.
broadside." I don't know how
Mhm.
far it was, maybe 20 yards, maybe 25 yards, and it
Mhm.
is just standing there. But I was so big on my movements of my bow. I was like, "How am I not scaring this thing off?"
Mhm.
Finally, I was able to, and this seems like an eternity. I don't know how long it lasted, but I remember thinking, "Get your circles together." And I just slowly
Mhm.
circled my bow until it was small enough to be on the kill zone. And
Mhm.
and I was like, "Now or never." And I just sent it. I can guarantee you I punched my trigger on that one. I
Sure.
hit
Yep.
front shoulder,
Mhm.
and this bull came running right downhill past me, but limping. And I was able to
Mhm.
quickly knock a second arrow, and
Mhm.
we got it to stop. And I took a 30-yard shot, and I was able to stay just smooth on that one, and was able
Mhm.
to double lung it. But that whole first like target panic or
Mhm.
the experience of what it was, once again spoke to myself about what I needed to do to
Mhm.
get myself under control. Really fascinating. Never thought about it like this.
Right. I mean, it is the pattern of success. Nobody ever does that stuff blank minded. Can you imagine being blank minded in that situation?
No, not at all.
I mean, it's not going to go well. So to get yourself under control, you had to speak. And you've got your buddy two shot there. His first shot, he lets his mind race and go crazy, and then his determination is so much higher on the second shot that he actually remembers to do some stuff,
Mm,
right?
yep.
It happens a lot with people. People are like, "Oh man, I shoot him good on the second shot, but the first shot's always a nightmare." Well, that's why.
So, I mean, I 100% grasp the concept of self talk. Besides
Mhm.
keep pressing, keep pressing, keep pressing, what are some of the things that you hear or people, because each shooter's different, right? So for archery, back elbow up. That's my mantra. What
Mhm.
are some of the things that people are having to practice speaking or that are consistent? Obviously, to create your own or to copy you. What do you see?
More important than the words that you speak are the decision to speak them,
Mm,
right? Because with every decision, like when was the last time you stood in front of a target and instead of just drawing your bow back, you said to yourself, I'm shooting this shot with control no matter what,
right.
right?
Right.
And then and then you draw your bow back. What happens with most people is they just draw their bow and they find themselves at full draw instead of drawing their bow with knowledge and purpose and knowing exactly how the shot's going to go.
Yes.
Like, I can tell you how every shot for the rest of my life is gonna go. I can't tell you where it's gonna hit, but I can damn sure guarantee you that I'm gonna work that trigger like a machine,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
Why wouldn't I? I know exactly how to do it, and I have it blueprinted.
It's
I know what I know what I'm thinking after "Here I go." I know what I'm saying to direct and trap my concentration. I know what my mantra is, if you will. I know that I could stop that trigger movement anywhere within it. And for me to be able to say yes, I could stop my trigger anywhere within it. That means that my determination was high enough so that I could make a decision, so that I could increase my presence, so that I could concentrate.
man.
So, determination, decisions, presence, and concentration, those are the four fundamentals of precision shooting.
See what you did there.
So, yeah, so I mean, it it's very powerful. I can't explain how powerful it is to know exactly how you're going to shoot every shot for the rest of your life,
Man.
right? And that's where I had to get to in my tactical work, because for the first like 8.5 years as a sniper, while I was developing this system of control process shooting, I still didn't know how it was going to go,
Hmm.
right? Until I finally started to figure out what was it about these, because I shot one controlled shot in 2008 with my longbow. I shot another controlled shot, just one, in 2010 with my longbow. And between, well, see, 2009, I shot a bunch of uncontrolled shots, killed a bunch of stuff, but I shot uncontrolled arrows,
Hmm.
meaning I didn't get all the way through my trigger properly, right? But I still killed critters.
Right.
2010, controlled shot. 2011, 12, 13, and 14, killed tons of critters with my bow. But none of them were completely what I would consider controlled. I was getting the aim done. I was at least present enough to get the aim done, but I would always dump my string as soon as I saw the aim was right.
Mm.
So
Interesting.
I was sitting in the tree stand on December 14th, 2014. I've told this story a million times. If your listeners listen to other podcasts, they're going to go, "Oh my God, we've heard this before." But December 14th, 2014 is a very specific day for me. I was hunting a blacktail buck by my house that I'd been after all season. He'd only been in the daylight 3 times. And every time he was in the daylight, I had to work or whatever. I wasn't there. I was not in the stand. So I went down there this one rainy evening. I climbed up in my tree stand and I'm sitting there and it's almost dark. And here he comes. And he comes right underneath my tree stand. I'm looking between my feet at this buck, big 3-point blacktail. You know how it is, the gray ghost.
Oh yeah.
So he turns around underneath me and he walks straight away from me. And I draw my recurve back and he turns broadside and I aimed where I needed to aim and I dumped the string and I shot him right in the heart. And he ran off just doing the death run like super fast. I'm like, man, I smoked that thing. But in the back of my mind, just like all those other shots, I'm like, man, I did not get through my trigger right. So what happened was I didn't even go look for that deer yet. I just sat in that tree stand and it was raining and now it's dark. I sat in that tree stand and I said, what is the difference? What is the difference between the shot I just shot 10 minutes ago and that shot that I shot in 2008 on that hog in South Texas and that shot that I shot in 2010 on that bull in New Mexico? What is the difference? And because I was so conscious on those shots, in fact, on that one in 2008 on that hog, I let that shot down because I was feeling the same anxiety and nervousness and all this craziness that I'd shot so many times before. I was locked off target and it was a nightmare. And I'm at full draw having this inner dialogue with myself. And I finally said, I ain't doing this again. So I let the bow down. Hog didn't see me. And then and only then, that was the first time I was pissed off enough to have enough determination. And I said, before I drew my bow back again, I said to myself, I'm shooting this shot perfectly or I ain't shooting it at all. And it finally meant more to me to stay in the shot process than to kill the hog.
Mm.
And that was a very important moment for me. But I never blueprinted it. right? So I drew back my bow again the second time, and I did my whole thing. I remember saying that I'm shooting this shot perfectly, or I'm not shooting it at all. As I drew my bow back, I said, I'm going to do this right. And that made me present enough so that I got my aim where I needed it. And it made me present enough to remember that I still got a whole other job I need to do, which was to pull through a clicker on my longbow.
Yep.
And I remember looking down that shaft of that arrow, and I've got the perfect aim. And I remember saying, here I go. Keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling. Click, boom. I dumped that string and smoked that sucker. Right.
Right.
And because I was so conscious, so now I'm in that tree stand in 2014, and I remembered everything about that shot on that hog. And I'm like, what is the difference? And I went, the difference is in the decisions that I made. Right. The decisions made me present enough to do the rest of the tasks. So after that day in December 14th, 2014, I have not and I will not ever shoot another uncontrolled arrow to critter.
Hmm.
That was my turning point, right? And I try to get people to their turning point. It doesn't take a lifetime. It takes you making a decision. So people ask me all the time, how long does your program take in shot IQ? And I said, it takes as long as it takes you to make a decision.
Man, it's so true. It's a I've said it before. Being a health teacher or a physical education teacher or somebody who likes to challenge myself, such as like ultra marathons. People are like,
Mhm.
I could never do that. How do you do that? And it's like you just make the decision that you just keep going.
Mhm.
It is the power of intent, right? It's
Yeah.
you are intentional. You're not like there's a difference, and I believe you're. I mean, you're hitting it on the head. Is like there's a difference between do you want to shoot your bow just because it's like a fun thing to do, or do you
Mhm.
want to be deadly accurate with your bow?
Mhm.
And so every time you grab your bow or you grab your rifle or whatever it is you want to do, what is your intent? What is your purpose?
Right.
Is your purpose to go to the range and make sure you're within a pie plate at 100 yards or 200 yards?
Mhm.
I mean, like what is your intent, and then focusing and taking yourself through the steps. Being a national archery and schools instructor, there's always the 11 steps to archery success,
Mhm.
and I love that, and that sparks me even more now hearing you talk about this because it's teaching the children or whoever's going through the course to speak through. They have to speak
Mhm.
through the 11 steps before they
Mhm.
even shoot. I,
Mhm.
I love that. Are
It's
you
it,
familiar with that?
yeah, oh yeah. I've done some NASP work. In fact, I've trained some NASP instructors because there's certain aspects. If you look at the NASP program, target panic is rampant in the NASP program. Most of the kids are not aimed at the target.
Mhm.
Most of them can't actually aim at the target without letting the string go, because that's the natural path. Because what they've done is the aim has become the stimulus for the shot. So when they first learn, right, they'll go through their steps, but when they are anchored and when they have aimed, they'll let it go, right? And then that process gets into the learning model, and it goes faster and faster. So then the aim being in the middle equals an explosion. So that's why your mind holds you off of the center, because as long as you're off the center, the explosion will not happen. And then when the subconscious is ready, it will yank the bow to the target and release the string at the same time. That's why in the NAS program, you see so many kids that jump to target or drop to target,
Mhm.
right? So if you could just make their aim trigger a decision instead of trigger the shot, right? Just because you've aimed, it's not time to shoot, it's time to decide. So if you were to get your kids to draw back and aim and let the little storm in the aim pass, because the mind sees that the arrow's on the spot it wants and it tries to shoot at that moment. So they're going to have to hold themselves back, right? So draw back and aim. And then once the aim is complete, here I go, and then they do a shot activation movement.
Hmm.
If you were to take in your NAS program, you know how all the arrows are fletched the same,
Yep.
right? So if you were to use the fletch of the arrow as a mechanoreceptive trigger, you would see exponential growth in your NAS program. So mechanoreceptors, are you familiar with those?
No, break it down for us.
Mechanoreceptors are sensory receptors in your skin cells. Like if and they pick up stimulus, they send signals to the brain then sends out the appropriate motor program. So if you and I were sitting here BSing and I put my hand down on a hot stove, the mechanoreceptors in the skin cells would send the signal to my brain that's hot. My brain then returns a motor program that gets my hand off the stove, right? So we're going to use these mechanos. Anytime you are shooting with your fingers on an archery system, your trigger mechanism is connected directly to your brain, and that's the problem, right? So we can shortcut that system by using mechanoreceptors. So you would have your students draw back and aim, and then you would see where does the fletch, what piece of skin, is it the nose, is it the lip, is it the cheek, wherever they're anchoring, that fletch is close to one of those surfaces.
Hmm.
And you want it about a quarter of an inch away from that surface, right? So they can draw back with a specific anchor so that the fletch is a quarter of an inch in front of their nose, let's say. Okay.
Yep.
So then, after they've aimed and after they've said, here I go, then they put full concentration into moving that fletch, pulling, right, expanding until the fletch touches their nose. The mechanoreceptors in the skin cells of the nose will then send the signal to their brain. Their brain will then send the release motor program. It happens within a hundredth of a second,
Hmm.
right? So they draw back and aim, and then they talk themselves through this expansion until the fletch touches, and then the mechanoreceptors will fire the shot for them. Because
Interesting.
if you allow the subconscious to tell itself when to let go, it will always link pre-ignition movements to the release motor program. That's
Wow.
not my opinion. That's just how we work, bro.
I freaking love it, Joel. You and I, you and I have some. We got some deep talks ahead of us. I'll tell you that. You're.
Yeah,
I love the mental game. Oh, but yet it's backed up, which is
yeah,
so often ignored in this world, and not just in shooting, but I feel like in life. We're
right.
creatures of habit rather than creatures of intent. It's like, well,
Right.
why do you go have a beer as soon as you get off work, or why do you go do this? It's like, well, it's just because of what I've always done. And that's exactly why
Right.
I started my platform, Mentorship is Conservation, is because when it came to hunters mentoring new hunters, a lot of them couldn't
Mhm.
actually speak how or why they did certain things. It was always, well, that's
Mhm.
just what I've always done.
Of course.
I don't know. I've never thought about
Sure.
that like that. And
Mhm.
so you are like the antithesis of what we're talking about when it comes to mentorship as conservation, because it's all about intent. It's all about
Right.
you speaking through your protocol in order to
Mhm.
achieve a certain result. And
Yep.
I love that. I absolutely love
Yeah.
that. Um, man,
It's so powerful to know this information. I mean, you think about it. This is information that mankind has been looking for since we started shooting stuff, right?
right.
I mean, we've been looking for this forever. And it took my lifetime of failure and the need to know why to figure it out. Because, when I was first firearms instructor and young and in years and doing all that stuff, all I had was experience, right? I had experience to pull from, but I didn't have the science to pull from.
Hmm.
And I remember there was a fella at the academy that he really didn't like how I taught things. And it I'm not quite sure why, if he didn't like me or what, but he came up to me one day after reading this mental mechanics an instructor's guide that I had written. And again, that was very rudimentary. And when the program was in its infancy, and he says, "What you're doing works, but it's not right."
Hmm.
And I took that as a challenge. I'm like, "Well, I want to know what's right." And he says, "Well, you're going to have to take my class." So I'm like, "Cool, let's do it." So I took his class in the advanced concepts of motor learning and performance. And because I had so much shooting experience up to that point, I was able to take the science and make connections that had not been made before between open and closed loop control systems and the determination and decisions that are required to get into a closed loop control system in a precision shooting environment. And that had never been done before. And then I copyrighted it, and the rest is history. So, um,
I
but
love it.
it's it's you know after that I was able to take my experience and connect it to the science. This is why this works. This is why this doesn't work, right? This is what most people are doing. Like most people go to the range and they'll shoot their bow, right? Because they are getting ready for a hunt or they like shooting their bow or whatever. But if you are punching the trigger, you are making yourself exponentially more efficient every time you do that. So when you get in a high stress event, you become ultra efficient to the point where you forget whether you're looking through your peep. You don't remember what pin you used. You just throw the whole rack of them on the side of the elk and punch the trigger. And that's why you missed the bullet 10 yards,
Hmm.
right? You became ultra efficient, right? And what I want people to do is use a shot to make the blueprint stronger, right? Use shooting to practice your concentration. You don't get better at shooting by just shooting. You get better and more accurate by using shooting to practice your concentration,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And then you get to the point where it means more to you to stay in the process than to kill that critter. And that is a major turning point for your hunting career,
Yeah.
that moment.
I love it. What do you have to say about the saying aim small, miss small?
So when they talk, anytime people talk about aiming, aiming is driven by the science of visual proprioception. So aim small doesn't necessarily miss small, but what aiming small does, like if you're able to pick a very minute point, it gives your sight, be it a pin on a bow or the reticle in your crosshairs or whatever, it gives it a much more acute point to return to. I call it an anchor point, right? So when you were trying to reduce your circles on that bull that was coming into you,
Yep.
if you were able to pick a hair on that bull, then or a little patch, a little tuft that was in the right spot, then that pin is a much smaller area to always anchor to. Okay. No matter which way your pin moves, its next movement is always back to the center. I mean, you can take a pin and hold it out at full extension and put it on a spot on the wall, and you'll see its movement. And you'll notice that no matter which way it moves, its next movement is always back to the center. And the only way to control that is by watching it through your eyes, visual proprioception. Same concept when you drive. When you're driving, you see a yellow line and a white line on the road.
Hmm.
You're looking down the road, you get visual feedback that your vehicle is veering slightly to the left, and you automatically make a movement on the steering wheel until you get the right visual feedback. Then your vehicle's back in the middle of the lane and you stop that movement,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And then it just continues and you're constantly aiming. You're not looking at the hood of the car, you're looking down the road because the visual proprioception controls it. I mean, you're literally aiming 24 hours a day unless your eyes are closed.
Right. So then
So,
that brings me to my next question, and we'll kind of wrap it up with this because I believe I want to be respectful of your time, and I know I could talk with you for a long, long time, Joel.
yeah,
Um, Shooting, one eye open or two, because now you're talking about adding that extra element of what you're seeing versus your focus versus your intent, or as I like to say it, it's an and game, not a or game. So this and that rather than this or that. So
it,
people
it
ask you about that.
purely depends. It purely depends on um, it depends on what sight system and what shot you're shooting. Like if you're shooting a shotgun, you really should have both eyes open so that you had depth perception, because a shotgun shot, the movement of the shotgun is completely controlled by your eyes. And you yank the trigger on a shotgun, it doesn't matter what you do on the trigger of a shotgun, right? But if you're shooting a rifle, if you can shoot it with both eyes open, cool, right? You could see maybe some things coming in from the side, but it's not required.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're shooting your bow, doesn't matter. Two eye. If you're shooting instinctive, it's better to have two eyes open so that your left eye, or if you're, let's say you're shooting right-handed, your left eye will pick up some trajectory path because it's looking at the side of the arrow, whereas your right eye is lining up the top of the arrow. Whether you see what your left eye is seeing or not, it can't hurt. But if it doesn't hurt that much to close an eye.
Man.
I mean, it's not that big a deal. Two eyes open. Now, if you're talking throwing a football, pretty tough to throw a football with one eye closed because you don't have any depth perception. You don't have binocular vision anymore,
Right.
right?
Right.
So in the precision world, doesn't matter. In the shotgun world, for other sports, football, baseball, throwing things, two eyes is better.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
it's not that big a deal. It's just, it doesn't matter if you aim small, miss small, and then you punch the crap out of the trigger. Well, that didn't help you none. Now did it?
Right. Right. And it
Right?
goes back to
Doesn't
I,
matter because your pre-ignition movements are going to carry you outside the acceptable range anyways.
are you a movie fan? Do you like watching movies?
I don't have much time to watch movies, but sure.
there's the movie Last Samurai with Tom Cruise. Have you
Yeah,
ever seen
I've
that?
seen it.
Okay, so when the samurai leader, he's like, too many minds, one mind.
Yeah.
I love that line. It always brings me back to this whole concept. Exactly what you're talking about. It's like you can't put the cart before the horse. You have
Right.
to have order, and through order is progression, and that ultimately leads to your end destination. And I think with
Right. And
just real quick, just with hunters, it's all about like, oh man, I want to get that kill, and it's not always like that,
Mhm.
but like successful thought progression is that's at the end of everything. It's not the
Right.
start of everything.
Right. And when you're talking about one mind, it's singular minded, right? How do you become singular minded during a shot? And that's where the determination, decisions, presence, and concentration come. Right? How do you keep your mind on one thing? You do it through speech. We do it all the time, but people don't seem to realize how it works in shooting.
Mm. I love that. We're gonna get off this podcast here, and I'm gonna go speak to myself. We're gonna. I love it. I
Nice.
love it. Hey Joel, how can people find you, get a hold of you, get signed up for your courses and all that?
So shotiq.com is my website. That's where all the online courses are. I've got a book available on Amazon. It's all controlled process shooting. So on the website, I've got an online course in archery, all things archery, compound, trad bows, all the different releases, all the different mechanoreceptive triggers, all the science of the mind, how it works. That's the controlled process shooting course. And then I also have a precision pistol course on there where you're able to apply control process shooting to the precision pistol world and also the tactical world of open loop pistol shooting as well. So those are on the website, Joel Turner _ shot IQ on Instagram, and we're on Facebook, and we're all over the place.
Love it. Love it. Brother, I
Yeah.
cannot wait to shake your hand, bro. And really because I'm picking up what you're putting down. Let's just say, like
Good.
I'm ready to complete your course already because I'm there. I my intent, I know what I want. That's how I always talk about it. Is like you got to know what you want, and then the how takes care of itself. Guys, thank you so much
Right.
for listening to this podcast. Joel, thank you so much for coming on, brother. I really appreciate it. Guys, go check out Joel at shotiq.com. Go follow him on social media. And it's time to make 2022 a better year as we are more intentful in all the decisions that we make and the power of our words and using them to better our lives and to better our hunting and our shooting. And so be blessed, everybody. Remember, life is happening for you, not to you. Freedom on. And as always, stay soulful. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com and be sure to follow the podcast as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful.